Welcome everybody back. We'll go ahead and start off our second session. The name of this session is Tailoring Approaches to Meet the Needs of Your Campus Community. Its moderator today is Stephanie Hannenberg, who's Executive Director of Health and Wellness and Recreation at the Wellness Center at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and also President of American College Health Association. Welcome.
Thank you, Devin. I would like to go ahead and introduce our panelists for this session. We have Cynthia Burwell she's a professor in the Department of Health and Physical Education and Exercise Science and the Director, Center of Excellence in Minority Disparities at Norfolk State University. And then we have Mary Ross, Alexander is the Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs at Tennessee State University. And then we have Sarah Harte, who is the Assistant Director, Outreach, Colonial Health Center, Counseling and Psychological Services at the George Washington University. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to do it more informal so that they can just kind of jump in whenever they feel they have a response for the questions. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first one, which is how can institutions best evaluate their student demographics and what their needs might be based on those demographics? That was a nod to you.
Enrollment management is my best friend. So I'm in their department pretty regularly trying to figure out who they're recruiting and who's been accepted. And from there, I start looking at where those students are coming from, what areas of town in the states that they come from, and that helps to form my basis for evaluation of the demographics that we're seeing for the next school year.
Likewise, well, let me just say that I am on the academic side at the university, but I do have a long background in the area of student health because I worked as the Director of Health Promotion at two other institutions. So with that background coming from student health and coming from the academic side, I do work very closely, with admissions and enrollment management because with looking at student needs, we need to know where they're coming from. Most of our students, I'm with Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia. Most of our students come from that area. We do have some students that come from other cities within the state, but most of our students come from that local area. And so knowing where those students are coming from is going to help us in planning what their needs are. Looking at, we do some surveys, which I think a lot of universities do surveys to find out what students are going to be needing so that you can better prepare for them, but we don't always get it right. So working very closely with admissions and enrollment management is going to be very helpful in doing that.
And I think I would just add on, well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for being here and welcome to George Washington University. It's really great to have you all and ACHA here in our house. I work in the Colonial Health Center, which is on the ground floor of this building. And so while you're here, if you'd like to take a look, you're welcome to come down for a tour or find me and I'll show you around. The Colonial Health Center here at GW is the home for both medical and mental health services, counseling and psychological services. So anyway, very welcome to GW. But I would add on that knowing the demographics through the admission process can be really helpful in designing programs and also really staying nimble as to who it is that we're bringing onto campus. And that includes, and I think in the previous panel we talked about this a little bit, international students, first-generation students and transfer students, which we know from a mental health perspective do have additional barriers to accessing care and some additional challenges when they come onto a university campus. And so that's one of the areas, those three groups are groups that we work with our enrollment team to kind of be aware of and our student affairs team to think about programming that might be able to start the conversation early on about adjusting to college and welcoming people to GW.
I'd just like to also add that knowing that demographic of your students, and I know that we have, as the other panel alluded to and talked about, we have a lot of students who do have families, they have children that they're parenting, they have jobs. I'm talking about full-time jobs and trying to be a full-time student and have children. That's a lot. So looking at students as a traditional, in that tradition, through that traditional lens is not where our students are today. And being at an HBCU, this is what we see. And so it is very, very imperative that we look at that population to see what they are actually needing. How can we meet those needs? Because they do have a lot of needs that I think are not being met.
I'd also like to add that when you see a shift in the data points, those are critical points for addressing different issues that are going to be brought to your campus. So for instance, the culture, the climate we're in right now, right? HBCUs have seen an increase in, what's that? Bias. No, not bias. I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for. An increase in applications, right? So we're having more students apply, but the students that are applying have higher GPAs, they have higher test scores. Their needs are significantly different than the students we traditionally have on campus. So I'm a data-driven person. You know, I like what the data tells me. The data leads what I do every day. And so when I see small shifts, it's seemingly small, but those are critical points of access for us to understand what type of student we're going to get. So when we saw that increase in students that had higher GPAs and higher test scores, their needs were significantly different. And so my staff had to get on the ball before we got these students on campus with addressing those concerns. So again, that data will tell you a lot. If you look at it and you see those shifts in the data, those are points of action for you.
And you addressed this a little bit earlier, but then who are your campus partners that you're working with to kind of monitor as there's shifts, and what we saw 10 years ago isn't necessarily what we're seeing today? And so who are you kind of coordinating with and collaborating with so that you're staying on top of that?
So any type of institutional review folks, your institutional effectiveness folks, those folks are really important to helping you understand not only the students that are coming in, but the students that we have currently and what's happening for them. We at Tennessee State University, anyway, we have a committee of inter-university committee. It's a member of 10 folks who come from all over the campus, and we talk about everything that happens with our students, including, you know, whatever shifts we're seeing, whether it be the climate has changed. So the student that came in 4 years ago is experiencing college different than our freshmen coming in. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be able to shift with those folks. So for us, it is definitely reaching out to the entire campus and getting that feedback.
I agree that you do have to reach out to those institutional research folks to get that data as well, as well as developing partnerships with faculty, developing partnerships with student affairs, and just getting together to talk about what they're seeing as far as the demographics of the students coming to campus. And then trying to get everybody on the same page. That's a lot. Because as a health and wellness person, you're coming from one perspective, and the folks on the academic side are coming from another perspective, and then so you got to try to, pull those together to try to begin to develop programming that's going to meet the needs of the students.
Well, I would just add, to piggyback on what you both said, is I think we try and find as many interdepartmental groups or networks or planning committees that we can to participate in. So we have a few opportunities to hear not only what we see in the health center, but also just around campus, to hear from our colleagues, whether they be faculty or staff, about some of the trends that they're observing in the classrooms or in the residence halls. So we have a campus education network, health education network, where we bring together all of the folks who do health education, not just our health promotion team. Of course, they are really a key part, but also people in our student affairs programming, the folks from the gym, the Health and Wellness Center, people from the Veterans Support or military affiliated supports. Those people who are also doing a lot of wellness and health programming that have a different relationship with the student body than we do. And so to hear as many voices as we possibly can about what are the trends that people are seeing, what are the conversations that they're having with students, to try and inform through a feedback loop about what types of programming might be needed at the time or interventions for the campus.
So as the students are changing over time and you've kind of got a pulse on it now, how do you then go back and evaluate the effectiveness of the programs or services you're providing to see if what you've had in place is still serving their needs? And then if not, what's the process you kind of go through so that you can make those adjustments to meet the needs as you're seeing them in the moment?
Well, I think one of the things that we've done is, we do offer the programming, and you do check to see how many people are coming to the different programs, who's accessing the programming. But if you see that they're not accessing it, then you really pull folks together again to say, what do we need to do? Even challenging or even getting with your student health advisory folks to see what can be done differently. It may be that, as Sarah talked about on the other panel, you may be offering things at the wrong time. It may not be the right time of the day that you're offering something. So you have to really sit back and see how things are going, and then reassess it to see how you can improve on things if they're not actually attending. I think, and this kind of goes to one of our questions, involving the students in the planning. That's key. That's very important, because I can see things through a different lens, you can see things differently, but how are the students looking at it? What are the students really needing? And I think it's imperative that we do that. We have tried in the past to do student peer education, but we have not found it to work that well. I've worked at predominantly white institutions where peer education, they're grabbing, they're trying to be a peer, whereas on our campus, it hasn't caught on. So we're trying to look for different ways to get our students involved so that they can be a part of doing that assessment, doing that planning, and designing those programs.
I think, too, about really wondering and being curious with the students, what is the competition for their time, and thinking through the choices that they have to make. And a lot of times the students will say, the choice is either my academic success, my self-care, or something outside of the university, whether it be a pull on their time from their families or work or other obligations that they have. And that's an impossible choice. And I think we need to be really intentional about thinking about ways that we can not ask students to sacrifice one of those things for the other, and trying to figure out a way to integrate some of the co-curricular programming or wellness programming or information into the places where they've already prioritized their involvement. So we have some creative programs here that we're just starting to get some traction with, and we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback through evaluations and participation, that in particular our nursing program, which is a really intensive, fast-paced 18-month program, which is typically a second bachelor's degree, that's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, with a lot of students who have families or other part-time jobs, they have what they call a professional wellness initiative, where it's really talking about what is it that a nurse would need to know to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to establish sustainable health practices for themselves, and also for them to be able to share or impart with their patients. And so it's a really wonderful opportunity to integrate that into the curriculum. So it's in classrooms, it's through lunch and learns, it's through programming that's already part of their daily schedule. So they don't have to sacrifice an hour of study time to think about what their self-care could be. So that happened with the nursing school, and it's also a program that we are developing and have developed with the law school, also where the law students are fun. They get a Dean's Commendation for Wellness on their transcript, which for law students, anything that can advance their performance is wonderful for them. And so it's a really strong motivator that it ties directly to their academic efforts, which is why they're here, but also marries that directly to health and well-being. And so they can opt into several different types of programming that focuses on health and well-being and earn that commendation at the end of their 3 years of law school. And so I think we have to be really creative about not asking them to do one more thing or to sacrifice, staying up a few hours to study for their exam or writing their paper so that they can think about their own health, which unfortunately we're not often motivated to do for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, I'm a data nerd. I really, really like numbers a lot. I probably should have been a mathematician, but I was the counseling center director for 5 years prior to the AVP role, and what I found is that we did programming, and we planned our programming semester at a time, maybe a year at a time, but that wasn't really addressing our students' needs as well as it could be if we had a more formal assessment and evaluation approach. So, and in the AVP role, I see how important it is now to have, strategic plans, strategic goals and outcomes that are measurable at 5 years, 3 years, 1 year, down to that 3-month semester type of thing. So I've charged all my directors with giving me a 5-year plan. What do you want to see happen in 5 years with your programming? Not a programming, but the programming in your department. What happens in 3 years? What happens in 1 year? What happens next week? And that helps us formulate at least a game plan for how things are going to happen. And then there's a formal outcome evaluation. So it's not just about service delivery, how many people came. What was the learning outcome for the student? What did they gain out of being a part of that program? And then if they didn't gain or they didn't attend, maybe we shouldn't do that program. Sometimes we're so steeped in tradition that we keep doing the same programming over and over again because we know when to do it, we know how to do it, but we're not doing it really well. So one of those programs that we changed was the National Depression Screening Day, which if you're in mental health, everybody knows it's in October. It's the first week, usually in October, and we just open up a shop, put a table up, and say, hopefully the students will come. That wasn't working. So we had to get a little bit more creative in how we did that. So we have this pizza company that everybody loves in Nashville called Slim and Huskies. And so if you're watching, I want my cut. And so we had Slim and Huskies come, and they brought the truck. And, we just had to do something different to make sure that our students wanted to attend that programming. But if we don't have the data that tells us that, then we just continue to do the same things over and over again because we've been doing the same things over and over again. So a formal evaluation that has metrics, a rubric, a number that comes out of it somehow, and then you measure that number on the number you had before, and that makes you determine how you're going to do things because numbers don't lie. They tell the truth all the time, and they really guide us and let us know what we need to do, and then we can get our feelings out of our programming.
So if you assess your services and programs and things seem to be going well, but you're hearing repeatedly from students that maybe it's outside of your realm, maybe it's another area that you see a need, that there's a gap for the students. How do you advocate on behalf of the students, whether it be to upper administration or other departments, or how do you work and partner so that you can help the students in all areas?
I am a clinician by trade, so I'm just going to, that's the disclaimer. And so in my training, the goal was the Therapeutic Alliance, right? Sitting alongside my patients and helping them get to where they wanted to go, not where I wanted them to go. And so that translation for me in this position is it's a student-centered approach, meaning the students guide and tell us what is needed and what's necessary. So for my directors, that's the only way we do things. So our students let us know what program we need to have, when we need to have the programming, how we need to have the programming, and I fight whoever I need to fight to make sure that happens, because at the end of the day, the outcomes are going to be better, right? If the students tell us what to do, when to do, and how to do, and of course we use wisdom and how that gets done, then they're going to be bought in to attending or bought into having their friends attend. So for me, it's centered on students, it's centered on data and evidence-based practices, and then that's how we determine what program we're going to do.
I think we really try and harness student advocacy and student organizations to channel some of those needs that are not being met from the students, and also really organize around how to be able to communicate to the administration and the university about what the students need. And so it's our practice really to always be creating relationships with the student organizations that are coming together to speak for the needs of groups or interests on campus, and that we know that we're here to serve them, we're here to help them with their development, and that if they're passionate about something or if they notice a need at our university, that we need to take their request seriously and think about how we can partner with them to either meet the needs with the existing programming or shifting programming that we have now, or support their voice or support their strategies in talking with the administration. So here at GW, there's been a very significant shift over the last year or two to really question what is everything, the things that we're doing here. Are we serving the university and the bureaucracy of the university, or are we serving the students? And really thinking about the student experience and changing some of the ways that we work from the institutional perspective about, is this really a student-friendly way of helping somebody navigate their studies here at GW and their life and their well-being here? And I think that's a really important question that we've needed to adjust at GW, and that I think a lot of institutions really need to adjust, because as an institution grows and years go by and generations, things get entrenched, processes, traditions, and other things that we at times need to reevaluate and ask, is this the most student-friendly way that we can do this particular process? And I think there's still lots of work to be done here at GW regarding especially food insecurity and access to healthy food, especially since we're such an urban campus, we don't have a traditional dining hall, and so that's something that we're really listening to students and trying to figure out, how can we create an environment where people are taking care of their needs within the limitations that we have as an urban campus. So that's one example.
Well, I do believe that partnerships are very, very key. One thing we do have at Norfolk State, we have actually, from the provost level, we have a committee for student health needs. And so that committee has different entities from around the campus that are on that committee, but sometimes we just wonder, and we kind of push back a little bit about who they have put on that committee. Are the right people on that committee? And so sometimes we have a little bit of difficulty in meeting those needs of the students because we don't have all the right people there. One thing with our campus, our student health is outsourced. So that makes a big difference. And so they are working from a medical model. And although our student health director is becoming aware of how the American College Health Association works and what the college health model looks like. It's been a long haul to try to pull them and get them to see how the college health model differs from the medical model. And so we're working very diligently with the different entities on campus to try and meet the needs from that committee that the provost has seen to put together. And hopefully we can get the right people on that committee to be able to meet the needs of the students.
Great, thank you. So Cynthia, you talked about this a little bit earlier. What role the students play in kind of designing services and programs? So I was going to ask you guys to go a little bit more in depth in kind of what does that look like, but also how are you making sure that you have a good representation of your collective student body? Because we know that most campuses have very diverse students with very different needs and interests. So how do you take that input and make sure you're hitting those different pockets and then letting them have that voice at the table?
Wow. We do have a student advisory committee, and not all the time do we have all students represented on that committee. We are an HBCU, so the majority of our students are going to be African American students. We have a small number of Latino students, a small number of Caucasian students, and so we do try to find ways to make them, or try to find ways to get them to be a part of those committees, but we've found it to be very difficult. So right now, we're working from what the majority is on campus, which is African American students. And so it's really important that students become involved in planning those programs, because we need to see from their perspective what is needed. And if we don't have them involved, if we're just trying to shove things that we may see, say at a conference, or we see something that we would like to have work on our campus, and it's not meant for our campus or our students, then we need to find ways to get the students involved in trying to design something that is going to be meeting those needs.
I think one of the challenges that we have here is that we have about 10,000 undergraduate students and 15 or 17,000 graduate students. And I think a lot of the grad students assume that the programming that we develop is really focused on undergraduate students. But that's not the case, but I think that's when people think about university health, when they think about universities in general, a lot of times they're thinking about that traditional 18 to 21 undergraduate population. And we have the charge to serve all students here at GW. And then when we kind of touched on this a little bit in the last panel about distance learning and online learning students, which is a really unique population that has even more challenges about how we can engage them in health and wellness. And what do they need? And so we really try and listen to as many voices, but the voices that are the loudest are often our student association, which is the student government here, our student health advisory committee, which is also primarily made up of undergraduate students. And so it's our role to be kind of aware of the larger landscape of the university. We at GW, we have this primary campus here, which is our Foggy Bottom campus, but we have three other campuses. 2 in Virginia and 1 about 15 minutes away uptown. And oftentimes those groups feel left out, forgotten, not included, and we have to have on our radar a larger area that we're thinking of, a larger picture. And so we need to think about ways that we can both tailor our communication to different students, whether it be undergraduates, graduate student, distance learning students, and being intentional about that. We've had some challenges around services that we can offer to distance learning and online students because of licensure issues that we're kind of exploring this new frontier of what can we do as clinicians for folks who are not in the jurisdictions in which we're licensed, and how do we create a community of wellness and well-being in those with those online classrooms, where a lot of those, what we would maybe call non-traditional students, would be engaging in their academic studies because it's more flexible. And so that's an active question that we have right now, is we're not quite sure what it is that we can do. I actually teach online at another university, and it took a little conversion process for me too, to think about what is it like to teach in an online platform, and how much of a community can I build within the classroom. And in a synchronous model, you can kind of have classroom dialogue, but you have to do a little bit more work or be a little bit more intentional to make sure that everybody is seen, that everybody participates, and that you're checking in a way that you can't maybe see somebody in the classroom, or if they're missing, are you noticing that they're missing? So I think that these are some newer challenges that we're asking right now. What can we do for those students?
I think we have the same issue. You know, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So our students that are participating, they get to help us design the programming. We try to address those students who are not represented by reaching out to those departments. We have a large Saudi population at Tennessee State. 14% of our population is Saudi students specifically. So we reach out to the the director of the international programming. We might not get those students to come and sit on our advisory boards, but we can at least hear from her what's happening in her department, and then deliver services maybe in the institutional wing of our campus versus them having to come over to where our services are normally delivered. But more importantly to me is that we're in the business of teaching students, right? And that should be our focus all the time. So for us, our student workers are our ambassadors of our programming and our service delivery. So we really hone in on them telling us what's happening. They're the finger on the pulse of what's happening on campus. And so those students we hang out with, you know, we have lunch with them, we have breakfast with them. We want to know what's happening in the res halls. They tell us everything, more than what we want to know. But they also help us figure out what we're not being told. You know, what people are not saying when they come into the counseling center or the health center or over to exercise. So we really focus in on those student workers, helping us to design programming and then taking it back to their peers and then reporting back to us from their peers on whether that programming is actually happening the way we intended it to.
So I think we all know that parents are probably more involved now than they were in the past. So how do you manage working with parents in this ever-changing climate of your student demographics?
So I read something recently in USA Today or something that the new name for the parents of this generation is the lawnmower parent. You know, they just mow over every problem the child has. The problem never has to deal with anything. And we're actually seeing those students come to us in crises a lot of times. And for me, it's like, that's not a crisis, but we'll definitely get through it. So sometimes it's educating the parent on what their role is as the parent of this adult student that we have on our campus. Have more of those conversations than I want to have. But so we're educating them on their role, but then also asking for their input on how we could better communicate to their student and help their student communicate with them.
Yes, parents are are becoming an issue. Because I work on the academic side, I get emails all the time. How's my student doing? What can I do? The parent is wanting to know, what can they do to help their student be successful? And so, first of all, I have to let the parent know that if your child has not signed a release for me to talk to you specifically about their issue, then I can't do that. I have to get a release from that student. But I do try to, in general, express to the parents the need for the student to come to class, the need for the student to do, things that are going to study, to, do those things that are going to help make the student successful. But we do find that the parents a lot of times tend to want to do everything for the student. We found that particularly where I work. And so we are finding the parents what they're trying to do is to come up with solutions themselves for the student instead of asking the student to work with the professor or whoever they're having issue with to work towards those solutions themselves.
I echo what you've both said, and we've even had conversations within the counseling center here. Are we being lawnmower counselors? Or is the university being a lawnmower administration in some kind of ways? And really trying to find a workable place in between being student-focused, student-friendly, and not removing so many barriers that people don't have the opportunity to practice resilience or problem-solving themselves. Because I do think that there is a pressure to remove barriers as much as possible, and I think in lots of ways that's very appropriate, especially with things like mental health access and healthcare access in general, because there are so many additional barriers. And so we don't need to intentionally put up barriers or not address the ones that we have, but we also need to be realistic about what is the role of the university and the administration and the university services to help students navigate the process, and their parents. We have a family engagement office here, student success and family engagement, that really works to be proactive in communicating with parents about what to expect when coming to the university and how to manage that change in relationship with students as they grow up and become more independent, but also stay connected to the family. And I think we run into, in the counseling world, an additional factor, which is the parents and sometimes families' fantasy about what the university can offer or what a traditional student trajectory is through university, and when that doesn't happen, or when somebody's really struggling and needs to take a leave or have some additional supports, how upsetting that is, because they really thought, that their student would be fine, and that's a kind of a grief process that they have to go through, and we really, I think, need to actively support them in understanding what their student needs and how to help them get connected to the services that they need. And that's a really challenging conversation to have with parents, because there's so much hope and so much optimism about what students' university experience can offer.
So you each have unique campuses from each. There's some things you guys have that are similar, I'm sure, and some things that are different. And so what do you see as some of the similarities in the student needs on your campuses based on the demographics? And then what are some of the things that are very unique for your campuses based on the demographics of the students?
Well, I'll just say at GW, we're only a few blocks away from the White House. So if you would like to take a walk this afternoon or during a break, you can head over there. And it's so cool. There are so many times when I walk around this neighborhood for a break and just am in awe about how the opportunity that we have to live in this city and be so intimately connected to the houses of government that we have. But I will also say that in the last couple years, in particular, with the change of administration, there have been really an increase of overall anxiety around the city, around Washington, D.C., on this campus, increased incidences of bias, both on our campus and in the city, and really a lot of fear about how comfortable students can feel in the city, whether they're worried about just their general safety or we've seen direct impact on our international students worrying about travel bans and things like that, where will their status their visa status last long enough for them to finish their studies, especially if they're here for PhD studies that can be extended. So I think that in DC in particular has taken an already sometimes anxious time in university and turned it up. But I don't think we're alone here in Washington, D.C. in feeling that, and I think we talked a little bit about it in the previous panel about the media, and we've just come out of a really focused attention over the last week about the kind of actions of the government, and I think that offers an opportunity for dialogue, and there's lots of activity, the energy and work around that, but it can be really overstimulating for students at the same time. And so I think that's one of the things that we at GW are constantly thinking of. We have unique things about this campus that the Secret Service are often around. We have really fun, exciting moments when there are ambassadors and national leaders and journalists and people right here on this campus, so it's so cool to be able to experience that. Just across the street, we have our main auditorium where last week Bob Woodward was here talking about his book, and the week before that, somebody else, I'm forgetting their name right now, was here. But every single week there's something really interesting happening, which is so cool and such an awesome opportunity for our students. But it brings with it some anxiety that I think we're finding we need to help students navigate. And then also being an urban campus, I think, is a unique challenge where students come from all over the world and the country and maybe haven't lived in an urban environment before. And maybe we're thinking kind of about a more traditional campus feel in the residence hall with the dining halls and things like that, that they sometimes struggle to find a community or find a connection to a place when our buildings are interspersed with other organizations. So we really need to be able to think about ways that we can create intentional community so that people can have that connection, so that people can find opportunities to intersect with people who they have things in common with and who they need to learn from. So I think that's one of the things that GW, it's a really mixed bag, and especially in the last couple of years.
What's interesting about that is that we're facing the same issues in Nashville, Tennessee, and maybe because we're at HBCU, the students are coming with a higher level of anxiety, whether it be, hey, the climate that's happening, they feel they want to be there because it's safer. Again, like I said, our enrollment is up as far as students applying to HBCUs. And so there's this level of anxiety around policing and safety. It seems to be a topic of conversation all the time. We're having a housing boom in Nashville, which is detrimental to our students. You can't find housing around campus that's reasonable due to gentrification. So our students are living 30, 40 minutes from campus when they're living off campus. And our on-campus housing has a wait list. Because basically it's the most affordable thing to do is to live on campus at this point in Nashville. So we're having the same issues with the urban campus and having how to connect with our students still when they're living 2 cities away from campus. So, it's just interesting that we're in totally different environments, but yet the students are coming with some of the same feelings or emotions and then some of the same issues.
I would say that we have some of the same types of issues as well as far as the anxiety levels of students. We are an urban campus, and one of the things that we're having to deal with is the whole safety piece. Not safety as far as the climate, but safety because of crime. We have a lot of violent crime that happens in the city of Norfolk. And if anything happens, a street from the campus, the campus name is drawn into it. So it disparages, the campus a little bit. But we have found that we have students we've tried to talk to students about, safety in numbers. They are getting robbed, walking to the 7-Eleven. And, you know, we've had some altercations with some of our students and some of the town people. So we're having to deal with those kinds of issues. And so we're, you know, really trying to work with our student government to come up with ways that they can themselves talk to students about campus safety. And as far as housing is concerned, we're very fortunate right now to have 2 residence halls being built on campus, which we are, you know, really, really proud of, because our enrollment has increased. And we had a couple times had to put folks into hotels because we didn't have enough spaces on campus. But here again, the gentrification issue comes into play because places where students would be able to get, you know, a cheap apartment, inexpensive apartment, that's not happening anymore. And then they're talking about tearing down the public housing, and the people are in an uproar about that because the city is trying to get out of that type of housing relationship. So it's presenting a lot of problems. And so, you know, we look at our campus as being the microcosm of what is in the community. And so the issues that we see in the community, we are also seeing on our campus. So we're really, really having to work very, very hard to make sure the students are as safe as possible.
Thank you all. I believe we have an online question for you, so Devin's going to go ahead and read it.
We do. The question is, as we think about asking students what they need, how do we also help them identify these needs? I often work with students who aren't able to articulate their needs.
I think that's a really good question. I think the role of self-advocacy is a skill that we're trying to teach in our students, and also not trying to kind of balance that message with that you're not alone, that you don't have to do it all by yourself, and so to really strike the tone of, if you're not sure what your needs are, then to collaborate with people, ask the questions. There's lots and lots of times when I have conversations with students who are really paralyzed by their fear of what would happen if they asked a question about their needs and who they could go to. And even the idea of just asking the question, I don't even know where to start with this, is so anxiety provoking for students. And so helping them know that it's normal when you ask a question not to know the answer. So it's okay. You know, the idea is that you have to kind of know the answer in order to ask the question. It's okay to just be curious and start asking mentors or faculty or TAs or other folks around campus that you feel some kind of affiliation for or affinity for, that you like, that you trust, and say, I just don't know. I know something's right, but I just don't know what that is. And that can happen in lots of different areas. One of the things that we do in kind of the mental health world is really thinking about some of the recommendations from the JED Foundation, that it's not just the counseling center that's responsible for having those conversations with students. And so checking in, you know, I see you're really passionate about this area of academic work. How's that going for you? Are you interested? What are you thinking about for your major? What would you imagine yourself doing after the university? How's this going for you? And asking some of those kind of questions that start to open up conversations with students to help them formulate what it is that they might actually need. And then we balance that too with lots of student requests about, the classic one in the counseling outreach world is we need a presentation on how to manage stress. And we could give 15,000 stress management presentations all year long. But that's the only thing people are asking for. But is it really? Is it really stress? Is that really what it is that's happening for you? Is this student group really going to benefit from talking about some like time management or other kinds of stress management tools, which are helpful? But maybe if we ask a follow-up question, we could get one level deeper about what it is that we could actually serve this student group or this request with. And that's one of the approaches that we're trying to take is, when we get a request from a student organization or a group or a classroom or some kind of affinity group to say, okay, we can do stress management. What's going on in your group? How are you doing? Is there anything else that we can help with that? And maybe it ends with stress management, and that's really what they want. And maybe it goes one step further or two step further to have an actual conversation about what they need. So asking those follow-up questions, I think, can be helpful.
I think also, constantly reminding students of the services that are on campus can help them navigate what they need as well. I know we do an awesome job freshman year, letting them know where counseling is, where student health is. But if they haven't had an opportunity or a need to access any of those places may just drop in the, go in the back of their mind, and they're not thinking about what those resources are on campus. So I think constantly letting students know what is available on campus, letting them know why they're there, what kinds of, services they do offer. I think that is something that we have to do constantly, is to remind students of what we do offer, and also that can help them get connected to community agencies as well.
I agree.
If we don't have any more online, then I have one more. Good. So the final question I'll have for you guys is, throughout the panels for today and tomorrow, we're going to talk a lot about how we make our case to administration. And you may be able to speak to this a little bit more, Mary. But so what are some of the challenges and issues that administrators are facing in dealing with some of these issues we've discussed about the changing demographics and the change in parents, and where do we fit in with them instead of us advocating to them? Maybe it's them bringing issues to us, and how do we help work through this together? Yeah.
Well, one, I mentioned before that we have from the provost level a committee for student health. So I think that says a lot, that they are interested in knowing what the issues are for students. And if we can get the right balance of people who are on that, it'll help us go a long way in providing services for our students. But I think one key issue, and I think Micah alluded to it on the other panel, is funding. We are asked to do our jobs and then more. And we've got to be everything to everybody, but with the same level of funding. So we've got to really try to be creative in trying to come up with, ways, and working with administration, I think is going to go a long way to try to see if possibly, there could be some fundraising, there could be more input from alumni, funding, those kinds of things. But trying to find creative ways, even applying for grants, those kinds of things can help go a long way, because that funding issue is always comes into play.
Well, I'm extraordinarily biased, right? So I have been on both sides of the fence. I was the clinician, then I was the director of the counseling center, and now I'm on the administrative side of things. So I'm the biggest advocate for my directors, and I'm always pushing and fighting for more funding and more time and more energy and more of everything. But one thing that I've done is I made sure my directors were equipped with how to write a proposal for administration. And I think that's the thing I learned as a director, is that my administrator needed to hear it a certain way. And a lot of times we're not taught as directors how to say or speak that language of the administrator. It has to be data driven. You have to have your budgets and your costs and all those things. And then you have to be creative. You have to think outside of the box. I was talking to, I can't think of her name, from ABC, from American Baptist College. And we're talking about a collaboration that we both have started with a local hospital to give services to our students at no cost to the university. And so those type of things have to be thought about when you're presenting this to an administrator. Now that I'm sitting as an administrator, I know, oh, now this makes sense. This is why my administrator didn't understand what I was saying, because I wasn't speaking his or her language. And so as we talk about the administrators, that's been the issue for me, is my directors not knowing how to present that information to me so that I could take it up the chain to further their cause.
Well, I would just like to thank you all for this wonderful discussion and for being panelists today. And again, thank the audience members here in person and those that are joining us via online. And then we hope that these conversations continue to go on throughout the day today and tomorrow, so please continue, and I'm sure our panelists would be happy to talk to you as well. We're going to take just a short break and reconvene at 11 a.m. for the next panel, which is Building Accessible and Desirable Food Solutions That Work. So thank you so much for joining us. You guys did great. Thank you.